We're talking about delivering compliance training that works. And my premise is largely that I don't think we're doing a good job of it. And we hope we can find out ways we might change that and address it. That's what I'm hoping for at any rate. So as I suggested, I'm going to ask you to use the chat window to answer some questions. And here's a hint. When I throw a question in the middle of the screen, it's a question to you to say. And in this case, my question to you is, why is compliance so hated? I think it's pretty clear it is. It's hated by the learners. It's hated by us. It's hated by, everybody except it's considered. So let's see. Don't like being told what to do. Yeah, they're forced to do it. It's a chore. Yeah, it's because it's mandatory. Little effect indeed. It's not tailored to individuals. It's, to make little effort to make people think, dry content. It's a waste of time, particularly having to do it again and again. We don't present it in the right way, too dry and not relevant indeed. It's checking a box, not usually thoughtfully designed. Mandated, learners don't see the utility other than CYA. Yes, exactly, Leslie. Not interactive, often preachy. IT's rules, its rules. Yeah, I mean, it's just not fun. It's a bunch of stuff. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Design most compliance training is kitchen sink style with no focus on learning objectives and performance change. You folks are pretty aware of what's going on, regulated heavily. Right. So really, the first reason is because no one cares. No one really cares about it. And the question is, why is that? And I think it's not having to do with it intrinsically. It's always do this or else. Yes, most often it's a content dump, focus on completion. We're continuing to see, interesting and accurate responses appearing. No one cares. Why is that? So I want to suggest when we look at compliance, the first thing was mentioned in the chat. Thank you, Leslie. CYA, cover your assets. If people do this, we get in trouble. So if we provide training on this and then people do it anyways, we can say they're bad people. It's not us, we tried. Now, the bad thing about that is there's no effort to make it actually any good. And it was Mark, I'm drawing a blank on his surname, the guy who wrote the book Beyond E-Learning. I know him, I like him. I've got it on the shelf, but I can't find it right now. Anyways, he wrote in a blog post once, I think it was his last column, that one of these days, somebody who has taken the training and gotten in trouble and is going to be tried for it is going to say, hey, I'm not bad because that training was ineffective. I think that one of these days that's actually possibly going to happen. But at any rate, right now, nobody's paying attention to it. They're only doing it because then they can say, oh, that's a bad person, we tried, and nobody's caring about if it's done. So it's just a cost of doing business. You have to pay, you have to do it, and government regulators require it. But it's not an investment in the future. It's a preventative measure. It's not anything seen to be important that's going to contribute to the organization. It keeps the organization from getting in trouble. Mark Rosenberg, thank you, Magdalena. That's exactly who I was thinking of. And I don't know why his name didn't come up. I can picture his face. But another thing that drives me nuts is it's measured by time. It says you have to spend 30 minutes a year or an hour a year or however long, mandated by governance. What does that mean? What do you have to do? If we can just dump content on you for an hour and that's about the cheapest thing we can do. We've covered our assets. And so there's a bunch of problems with why we might do this, and we can't see it. So courses written in legalese and don't reflect real situations. Yes. It's measured by time, not behavior. And yet we know good learning actually expects us to actually change behavior if we're actually doing things right. And there might be a reason that compliance should be about changing behavior, but the way it's done when people don't want to spend money on it because it's just a requirement, it's not an investment. So why care then? if that's what it is, just see why should we care about compliance? Should we care about compliance? And again, this is a question to you. Should we care? Should compliance matter? Or is it indeed just CYA? Is there any reason to care about compliance? Could affect funding, yes. If we could get rid of it, we would reduce what we spend on it, but does it have an important role? It's the right thing to do, and ultimately we have a duty of care. Yeah, Paul, I think that's a good point, is that it's the right thing to do, and we should care about it because of that. In regulated industries, because we're audited in it, yeah, that's back sort of the argument that we have to do it. But Philip says maintain safety. Yeah, sometimes there may be reasons. It's reducing modern slavery. Exactly, Simon. There's some rationale behind it. We give new people some messages about our organization. If it's done well, it may develop a culture. It's usually about topics that really matter. Duty to not to waste learners' time. This would also have a pact of learning development. Yeah, that is an interesting point, David. Our reputation is at stake. If we're being seen as the agents in the organization that are responsible for purveying this, anything that's bad about it comes back on us. Maybe that a lot of people regulate, but I want to suggest there's a different reason. Learners need to know how their work environment impacts them. Indeed, I want to say because it's important. We care because it actually is important. There is a reason governments mandate training about these issues. Philip picked up on it, because it has impact, like stopping slavery. Exactly. Oh my goodness. In my country, they've just discovered that there was child labor going on. That isn't supposed to happen. Somebody's missing some check somewhere. That's just heinous. So it's mandated for a reason. People did come up and say, and those reasons are, it could save us just time. We are mandating this, although that's usually not the reason for compliance. Instead, it's for money. It keeps illegal money flowing. One of the reasons to stop bribery is to stop behavior that undermines our systems. All more to me, I think, arguably importantly, it undermines money laundering, which is what supports organized crime. So there are lots of reasons. And the most important one to me is it saves lives. Skipping certain mandated practices in pharmaceutical testing and in operations. People die if you get this stuff wrong. So there are powerful drivers for doing this. And just cover your assets at it isn't a good thing to do. It is important. Fundamentally, if you look at the laws and what they're asking people to do, even, diversity and lack of bullying and sexual harassment, these affect people. Increasingly, we see the evidence that these have long-term effects on the people who are subject to it. The stress alone causes bad physiological reactions, but much more. We really do need to care about this. So in one sense, we've answered this question. What flaws do we see in our compliance? And we already suggested a number of them, but let's just recap the flaws we see. Well, let's not. And I noticed a message. Please, if you have questions, we have time. So please, if you have questions, toss them in the chat. If something I'm saying isn't clear and you want me to clarify, if you think about it and say, wait, no, that conflicts with something else I know we have to deal. Comments, questions, issues, please throw them in the chat. I'm pretty good at monitoring as we go along. And so hopefully we'll catch them. I want to suggest that there's a number of compliance flaws, and we talked about them already. There's a focus on information, which is a belief that if we give people information, they will change their behavior. And it turns out we have lots of evidence that that's not the case. People we're not formal logical reasoning beings, and we've had this history, this legacy of believing that. And it's really flattering to think we are, but there's a lot of evidence we're not. And we know that just giving people information doesn't make them change their behavior. You want to change behavior, you have to give them chances to practice changing the behavior, because otherwise they fall right back into the same behavior that was triggered before. It takes a lot of work to learn over the old traces. We don't unlearn, learn over the old traces. I'm going to pause here because I see a question in the chat. I'm keen to hear your views on mandatory training for line managers on management stuff, behaviors and processes. I'm under a lot of pressure to do this, and I'm reluctant. Interesting question. I think we're seeing a view that management, there's administrative stuff, but leadership is really coaching and developing people. Occasionally it's making decisions on strategy. But line managers typically have been taken from the line because they're good at the job and they turn them into managers, but they don't know how to be good managers. I wouldn't train them on unnecessary stuff, but I would train them about how to be coaching the people that they've been raised up above, how to maintain relationships with them and not deal with the resentment and any, hopefully it wasn't a political appointment, but also how to shift to be a coach and to be a line manager, not be a line operator. So I think there is an argument for some training. It's just a matter of which you're being asked to do, Judy. But one of the classic things is, oh, you're good at the job, now you're going to be a trainer, or you're good at the job, now you're going to be a supervisor. And those are new skill sets, and just assuming that people know how to do that. So I think there's an argument, but you have to be very clear on what that management stuff is, and if it's not relevant. But anytime people change roles, you need to make sure that there's the associated skill sets for those roles are there or need to be developed. I hope that answers your question, Judy. So back to compliance flaws. What first thing is that focus on information, the belief that giving people information will change their behavior. We won't. And that's why we get the content dump courses that are way loaded. Click to see more is believed to be some meaningful form of interaction. So the focus on information, not performance. Now, we have a problem because the governments are doing things like focusing on time, not performance. They're not saying at the end of this training, you should be able to do X, which would be nice. And it doesn't matter how long you take to do it. And this yearly requirement to reactivate it, ideally is not about spend another hour doing it. It's like spend another hour, spend whatever time is required each year to make sure you still have maintained the skills they haven't atrophied. If you don't have to practice them often, they're liable to atrophy. Let's keep them active, but let's keep focus on skills. Measured by time, which is just dumb. Limited budget, because nobody cares. They want to do this as cheap as possible. It's really hard to actually change meaningful behavior when all you're given is a budget to present content and a schedule to do it, in like 2 weeks, or just purchases off the shelf. And the stuff off the shelf isn't any better because it has to be generic to suit a wide variety of different organizations. And the experience that it results from this is boring. As a number of you pointed out, we get content dump, we get legalese language, we get just long periods of content. So it's long because it's required mandatory 40 minutes. May not take you 40 minutes to reactivate that knowledge every year and to keep the skills developed, but it's required by that way. So that is out of our control. We can start trying to raise the awareness of government about this, and we are, and basically there's no outcomes. There's no development or assessment of skills. You might have to do a knowledge test and you might pass that knowledge test, but there's no reason to expect that knowledge test is actually going to change your behaviors. It might, but that's not the way to bet. So it's not realistic. It's not aligned with what we know about how we learn, why we learn, and what effective compliance training really should look like. So those are the flaws I want to suggest we need to address. the question is, how do we fix it? And again, question to you in the chat, how do we fix this? How do we take the problems we have and how do we shift them to actually address it? We acknowledged it is important. A number of you pointed out ways in which it's important. How do we fix it? Start caring? Well, yeah, we do. That's why we're here. But more micro-learning, interesting why, you see. It depends on what you mean by micro-learning. It's certainly possible. Show consequences of not following policies? Absolutely, Natalie. I think you're digging into a bit about making it meaningful to the people. Approach it the way you would approach any other performance need that can address. Yes, Michael, I think we should. We should try to focus on changing behavior. Scenario-based, YC, absolutely. Bespoke training in bite-sized chunks. Yes, with the focus on what bite size is, interactivity, absolutely. We should get people doing things, get the right designers involved in developing performance, but yes, identify the most common areas where change improvement is needed. Ideally, you're absolutely right, Needy. What are people not doing that would lead to problems with this compliance? And let's make sure we're focusing on the most important parts. It just says do a better job of getting a buy-in. YC says performance focused. Absolutely. What is it people need to do? Natalie says ask provocative questions. I like it, Natalie. You're really trying to get the emotional component in there to help raise people's commitment to it. And YC is talking about actual changes in what we do that might then take advantage of that emotional commitment. Ask learners what they would like to see change. Yeah, get them involved in the decision-making, make it relevant rather than push what we think they should like, move away from an annual one-time training. Yes, Michael, that would be nice. If we could change the government requirements to say that just at the end of the year, everybody has to continue to demonstrate that that the people have the skills and the level of misbehavior is below a certain level or something, we would have a much better metric. The requirements are out of sync. Figure out where the disconnect following the procedures and focus on those aspects. Yeah, if we've only got a limited budget, maybe we should target it where we know the problems are. Make it rewarding. Arcana, sometimes there's, leaderboards and pins work for people who are in the top percent. I've heard that the people who aren't in the top percent on the leaderboards, it kind of turns them off. I'd be careful about that external stuff, but I do think, acknowledging that you've done it is worthwhile. But I kind of want to make it, I don't want to make it the top people. I want to make it, so YC saying gamification. Yeah. And I like to be careful about that because just attributing scores and leaderboards doesn't necessarily work for everybody. But if you make it a hurdle that says this is the level of competence everybody needs to meet, everybody can meet it, then everybody can earn the badge. That's some concern. So thank you. Engage top management about the topic and help convince them they must care. Absolutely, David. Playing the strategic game says, we can't change it if the executives don't get that it's important and should matter. I get them to do theirs first. Yeah, make them go through it, suffer through it, and see if they think it's still worth doing. Although they are being told by the lawyers we have to do it, they don't know that they're getting the message that if we did it right, we actually could reduce these problems. Because just having this content dump doesn't remove the problem. It says that they can kind of point the finger elsewhere. But if they'd actually like to reduce the problem, the costs that come from this lack of compliance, we might actually have an effect. And similarly, demonstrate that what we are doing is worth a waste of time, money. They actually have to do theirs, but making it do theirs first would be an interesting switch on that. So I want to suggest that we need to find, what we should be looking at is find the needed behavior change, not what is information about it. I sometimes believe that some of this compliance training, like sexual harassment training, really teaches you to do it better, doesn't serve as a deterrent. It talks about what it is good. Philip, yeah, the short sims that Clark Aldrich is promoting, which are essentially well-written branching scenarios, really put people in the situations and experience. And I think that's an important component. But first, we need to figure out what should people be doing and not. In a particular, we're developing a sample course on code of conduct as a demonstration of what compliance could and should be. And so we're focusing on what the behavior change is. What are the decisions in this case people need to make? If you observe it, you report it. If you, or, you can't ignore it. If you just think somebody's trying it on and they don't need punishment for it, you can just ignore it. But if you have any doubt, is this illegal or not? You ask only if you know that it's okay. But the point is focusing on the behavior, the core decisions people need to make, not just on information about it. In this case, the focus is bribery. Resource with tools. Provide support for the behaviors you need. If you need to identify people with mental health issues, you should have a checklist. If you need to intervene with bullying, you need some tactics. If you, in this case, need to ask or report about bribery, you need places to go. So you provide those specific tools to support the behaviors you need. You don't just try and put it all in the head. You make sure that the infrastructure reflects that commitment and make it easy for people to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing. You resource with policies. If you report it, could I get retribution? That's a big problem. What you need a policy that says, if you legitimately have a reason to wonder, even, let alone report, if you just aren't sure, you should always be able to ask, and there can be no retribution, and we make a commitment to that. So the policies have to reflect the practices you're looking for as well. They have to be aligned. And then to the point of short sims and interactivity, absolutely provide real practice. Put people in situations. What's happened here is now she's having to make a decision, Samara, but she has been led to this through a series of events. So there's a pressing need she has, and there's an opportunity to make a decision, and she can make good, bad, or mediocre decisions. But you need to provide practice so that we're getting there, and you need to focus on the outcomes, not what information they're going to be able to recite, but their ability to make better behavior decisions. And so you want to reinforce it. In this case, we made sort of a generic CEO who's talking about how our organization wants us to behave. And make those resources easily available, accessible in the flow of work. Good point, Michael. Back to the resource with tools. They need to be to hand when a situation happens. It turns out intervening with bullying, if you feel safe enough, you can actually confront the person, or you can, talk to the person and distract the attention and onto something else. If you don't feel safe, you just have to document and record it. And document may just be observe and go back and recollect. You can't be seen to intervene because you might be under physical threat. But knowing what to do and then having the tools to report it right afterwards when it's fresh in your mind are important points. So thank you for that. We can do a better job with compliance. We need, as has been suggested, the commitment from the top that this is worth investing in. And then we have to drill down into the actual things that we need people to be able to do differently, and then equip them to do it and give them the tools to do it. We still have the time problem. Yes, we still don't have the government measuring it in important ways, but we can make sure the time is covered while we're addressing these issues. So how do we justify this? We've touched on this a little bit already. How do we convince people that this is worthwhile? How do we get people to think that, wow, we should indeed pay more attention to compliance? What sort of support do we need to make that happen? Do you think? And you've mentioned some, but I have no problem with you reiterating the points you've made before. We've seen mention of, the leaders have to buy into it. Indeed, we do need them. Prep the learner with a teaser video or message from leadership. Absolutely. I think, Natalie, that we have to viscerally open them up beforehand. And we really want leadership to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. It'd be nice, a CEO could be saying, this is what we truly believe and how we want people to act. If they can tell their own story, that's even more powerful. Help them see the what's in it for me. Absolutely, Michael. Make it explicitly known what happens if they intentionally or unintentionally violate the policies. That typically is part of the existing compliance training that, if you're bad, this can happen. It does help for them to know the consequences of misbehavior, but it's not just the consequences to the org, but it can be consequences to the individual. Not just the individual misbehaves, but in certain instances where, where it's sexual harassment or bullying, talk about the consequences to the victim of these behaviors as well, I think is really important. But I think for a compliance focus in the organization, it needs to have real impact. You need to see that it matters. Expose and address misconceptions, yes. David says, what if there is no actual behavioral problem related to some of these topics? For legal reasons, we still need to be a compliance course. Interesting point, David. I'm not convinced that any compliance is not tied to behavior. Even safety in the organization, if it is a safe place, they are already making good decisions. And so it's not necessarily, which is why I'd like it tied to actual data, not just time. But in general, it's talking about, with safety, for instance, observing, are we appropriately setting the ladder up? Are we appropriately checking that we've got a clean workplace before we operate this power machinery and stuff? If you can give me an example of something that's compliance that doesn't actually involve behavior, I'm willing to be wrong. Natalie says the images and situations presented should mimic the employee's actual work environment. Yes, and I have this thing, if you need far transfer, so something about bullying can happen in a wide variety of work environments, you may want to use something that's a little bit more abstract so they can infer a variety of different environments, including their own. Lucy says, give them a taste of what better training would look like. Yes, I think with executives, if you let them see what good training could be, and tie it to, I think when convincing leaders of things, you need to have several things in your pocket. Absolutely, what a good solution would look like, what the competitors are doing, but also tapping into their, have a question you can ask them about, think about how you acquired a skill. Did you learn it through attending a course, or did you actually have to practice it and go out and, and don't talk about something from work, talk about a sport or a hobby or a craft and say, how did you learn this other stuff? Look, this is how natural learning works, tie into that. Then also have the research evidence with you as well. So, but absolutely, I think having a suite of ways to talk to executives. Philip says, consider incorporating critical thinking and decision-making elements to involve the learner. Well, indeed, good compliance is doing some evaluation, analysis, critical thinking, and we should put them in the situations to practice those. Help them see the real world consequences. One thing in this case, in our sample course, we actually referring to some data that says that 1 in 4 people paid a bribe. Wow, that's 1 in 4. That means if there's 58 of us, 60 of us here, 15 of us have paid a bribe at some point in time. That's really try to make it visceral, and I think that's an important component. And I think it was Natalie who was talking about that earlier, the importance of making it visceral so people go, oh. Employee engagement. I think the employees need to feel themselves being put in those situations. One of the things I find extremely hard in compliance is we ask people to do things and consciously we know the right way to behave. I can't, I know I shouldn't accept a bribe, but then under the real world pressures, I might. How do we mimic that? Well, we can only do as best we can, but we really need to put more pressure and emphasis on the type of pressure you will face in the real situation to make it visceral again. And that increases the likelihood that they'll get the message and make a decision and see how the decisions are challenging. That's, to me, the important thing. Improving the culture about this behavior is part of it, is indeed helping them see that this is the way we want to be, that this is, it's too easy to say, oh, don't be bullying, and then you go back to your workplace and there's bullying going on. That doesn't help. You have to have a systemic approach to fixing it, and that includes the culture and checking on it and creating, in the best organizations really care enough about it that if you report it, they will investigate it above board. Yes, Lucy, I absolutely agree. Instead of just giving them the information, put them in a place where they have to make a decision. Then they're motivated to refer to that policy or procedure, as opposed to just being given it and told what to do. So we have to work on the environment around it. So how are we doing this? How are we trying to redevelop compliance training to demonstrate what it could and should be? So when you're trying to make compliance that matters, the first thing is find the why. Why should you care? And communicate this. Yes, it's important, but it's not an obligation, it's a commitment. We're having the CEO give a, as was mentioned in the chat, having the CEO explicitly stating that they really care about this in a convincing way. It can't be, lip service type of stuff. We want you to not do bad things. No, but hey, this is who we are, how I want you to be. An authentic presentation from the leader is really, it has to be authentic, but if it is, I think that's an important component is, but why? Why do we care? We're a financial organization, and if we are seen as not being above board, nobody's going to want to do business with us. They won't trust us. If we're a pharmaceutical organization and we don't test properly and people die as a side effects, nobody's going to buy our drugs. It goes on and on. There's reasons for compliance. If we have a bullying culture, people aren't going to want to work with us. We're going to lose, and we're going to end up with people, and we're going to end up with not as good a performance as we get when we have an effective workplace. Find the why. Why does this matter? And we need to communicate that. Provide the way. Provide specific guidance about the behaviors you want. In the demo course, we specifically state what we want people to do, how we want them to behave. If in doubt, ask. If it's occurred, report it. In that order. It's who we are and how we are. So make sure that we're telling you what we want you to do and why, so it's clear what the behaviors are that are associated with this, what the skills are, not what the information is. Focus on outcomes. What do we want you to do? In fact, at the end, we actually have you actually perform. At the end of each module, we have one demo module on bribery, but we put you in situation, many scenarios, short sims, as was suggested, make you perform. At the end of the overall course, there's a number of scenarios, and we ask you to make the decisions. We want you to demonstrate that you can make these decisions, and you're not going to succeed until you actually can address that. Engage emotions. Now, this was deliberately a little bit over the top to start off a module on it. Actually, this starts off the whole course. You will sign us over your deed. No matter how horrible. But talking about the actual emotions that happen, and some of the things that happen in bribery are due to threats and trying to do the right thing. So we're trying to find why, provide support for doing the right thing, training you to behave in the circumstance in the right way, focus on outcomes of what you can do, and engage emotions. That's what we think is important for compliance. And with that, that's what we had to say on it. And what I would like to know is now, what questions do you have? First of all, thank you for your time and attention at this point. I hope you found it valuable. I hope you're inspired. Time to build this training is now to, yes, it becomes easier. It becomes more simple. I mean, you really still have an introduction, you have some information and presentation and activity, but instead of the introduction being, now we're going to tell you about this, it's like, why should you care? And the practice, instead of answer the questions about what this means, it's let's see if you can make the decisions we want. So it's not largely vastly more content. It's just thinking a little differently about it. At least that's my hope about it. Magdalena, I tried to show an examples in the sample demo we have, and we hope to we will make that available to you shortly. I'm not sure there are examples of topics or there's examples, but I think, for bullying, how to intervene, sexual harassment, again, how to intervene, bribery, how to evaluate whether it's legitimate and decide whether you should just decline or actually report it. There are specific decisions that you bake into the experience and provide specific support for the behaviors, the decisions that people need to make. And that's really the why and what people need to do. I hope that helps. You see a difference between instructor-led and e-learning approaches. Could you give some pointers on how you would design for one or the other? To be fair, as you see in the address, elearning@upsidelearning.com, this has been largely focused on e-learning. And so let me tell you what I would slightly do differently for face-to-face and recognizing that they're different. What you can do with instructor-led is have interactive group activities. And I would have role plays, and I would have people tell personal stories. That's hard to do in an asynchronous experience, but in a group experience, most people have observed it, if not experienced it, helping and tease out the emotions and the importance of it for things like, again, sexual harassment, bullying, some of these things that affect interpersonal. But even with, I would have them in groups, small groups, or even one, paired up to practice some of the behaviors. Those are a couple of things I would do in instructor-led to help bring it out. And I might, in some of the other circumstances, in fact, I observed this, and they were training on how to meet government requirements about checking to see if an expenditure met the government requirements. And they were, having experts go through bullet points. Nobody's going to do that. Give them an expenditure that's sort of in the, you start with one that's very clearly a bad one and very clearly a good one of white and black. And then you go in and start doing areas of gray and give them one that has some ambiguity about it. And in the process of them looking at the resources about illegal expenditure and debating it, they unpack the issues far better than you would by any presentation. So I think there are lots of tools we can do to do instructors. We develop OSHA training and use both the e-learning and a required classroom mock environment. The classroom is a required component. Oh, okay, fellow. Yeah, then I would, a well-known approach when you have e-learning and classroom is to get the knowledge done in the e-learning up front and then do the classroom afterwards as a chance to practice applying the knowledge. And what I just said about role plays, sharing stories, and actually working on sort of ambiguous challenges that reflect that are really good ways to take what they heard asynchronously through the e-learning and make sure that everybody ends up with a shared understanding. Thanks for the questions.